Greetings and welcome to Adorning Actuality. I'm Rachel, wife to one and homeschooling mom to four, bringing you, as promised, thoughtful and inconsistently posted content. Piggybacking off my last video, Blame It on Apologetics, I wanted to pass on some resources that will aid you in becoming a stronger apologist. On page 34 of Mama Bear Apologetics, a curriculum called Ratio Christi College Prep is mentioned. Of the young people who take this course, the attrition rate of those students who leave their faith during their college years falls from 75% to an impressive 13%. This study program is aimed at high schoolers and college students, but on their website, they have recommendations for curriculums for younger children as well. After each chapter in Mama Bear Apologetics, there are discussion questions to help facilitate and encourage conversation. On page 45, the last two discussion questions, and I'm just going to paraphrase here, ask us to think about how we can learn about apologetics and put the brakes on, so to speak, the youth exodus where we are. For me, I think of conferences as being a great avenue to get educated on the subject. But in this post-pandemic world, I'm not sure there are many in-person conferences being held right now. But that doesn't need to discourage us because we can still get trained via virtual conferences or watching old ones from the past or just finding a great teacher on YouTube. I couldn't help but be reminded of an excellent lecture I heard given by Jay Siegert of the Starting Point Project. Despite it being a few years old, it is still completely relevant. And he gave this lecture at a conference held by the Berean Call in August of 2017. Interestingly enough, and I only just found this out a few weeks ago, Mr. Siegert is a representative for Ratio Christi. The specific lecture Mr. Siegert gave that I'm thinking of is called Scientific Evidence for the Inspiration of the Bible. He begins it with one simple question: why are you a Christian? Siegert goes on to describe a common exchange. The answer he often gets in response to why are you a Christian is, because I believe the Bible. So then he asks, okay, well, why do you believe the Bible? And they circle back around to, because I'm a Christian, completing the first lap of the circular reasoning fallacy. I realized after hearing this, I don't even know how to answer this question. And about 6.5 minutes in, Siegert plays a clip from a radio show hosted by an atheist who is speaking with a caller who happens to be a pastor. When the host catches the pastor off guard with the simple question of why he believes the Bible is true, all we hear are crickets, followed by the pastor fumbling and bumbling over his words. And in the end, he actually became a bit rude to the host. And the bottom line was the pastor was not prepared to give an account for the hope that is in him. So after this story, I was desperate to know how to answer why I believe the Bible is true and why I'm a Christian. Well, Mr. Siegert goes on to list 4 tests we can use to determine if a book of a religion or belief is true. And spoiler alert, the Bible passes all 4. Number 1, internal consistency. This means it does not contradict itself. Number 2, historical accuracy, meaning it does not get history wrong. Number 3, prophetic accuracy, which means it makes predictions about future events and is never wrong. And fourthly, scientific accuracy, meaning it does not get science wrong. The claims it makes can be tested and proven. And the scientific accuracy test is where he spends the remainder of his lecture. Siegert begins with the fact that the Bible has scientific foreknowledge, which means before people had microscopes and other instruments or tools to perform experiments and make discoveries, the Bible had already written about those discoveries. So we can clearly see the Bible and science are not at odds, but that science supports the Bible. Leviticus 17:11a is an excellent illustration of scientific foreknowledge. It says, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood." Yet, at one time, doctors believed that bloodletting was a good way to cure a sick person. Doctors believed that sometimes if a person was sick, it was because they had bad blood and it needed to get out so the patient could get better. George Washington had between 5 to 7 pints of blood drained after he fell ill on December 13th, 1799. On average, adults have about 10 pints, so if this was not the cause of his death on the 17th, at the very least it contributed. The next example of scientific foreknowledge is probably my most favorite. Moses, who wrote the law, was raised in Egypt. He had access to education by the most learned people of that day. In Acts 7:22, we hear Stephen recount, Moses was educated in all the learning of the Egyptians, and he was a man of power in words and deeds. So, if Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible on his own, it would not be far-fetched for us to expect to find Egyptian wisdom and remedies in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Enter the Ebers Papyrus, written about 1550 BC, which contains 800 magical formulas and remedies for what ails you. Allow me to quickly interject here the name of a book called None of These Diseases, where some of the same info on the types of remedies found in the Ebers Papyrus is referenced. Siegert highlights a treatment for splinters found in the Ebers Papyrus, which is also mentioned in None of These Diseases. It's a mixture of worm blood and donkey dung. As both of my sources point out, this blend contains tetanus spores, which can cause lockjaw and other unpleasant symptoms, which can eventually lead to death. Another example of Egyptian wisdom, cited in None of These Diseases, requires the urine of a faithful wife to remedy a case of conjunctivitis, more commonly known as pink eye. Wonder how many women were implicated when her, let's call it, donation failed to work. Today, we understand that pink eye is a bacterial infection, and that if a splinter is not properly removed and cleaned, it could get infected. Now that we see the way that medical experts of Moses' day would treat disease, Siegert goes on to describe what God says to do, and Moses records, in the Bible concerning the bacteria one would encounter when dealing with a dead body, for example. In Numbers 19:6, God says, "The priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet material," that's wool, "and cast it into the midst of the burning heifer. The heifer ashes and cedar wood make lye, which is soap, and we know that kills bacteria. Hyssop converts to alcohol, which also kills bacteria, and the wool is there to just scour, agitate, and generally help work in an application of the cleansing waters." Then in verses 11 and 12, we see whoever touches a dead body is considered unclean for 7 days, and they are supposed to use these cleansing waters on days 3 and 7. And if they do, they are considered clean again. There's no way that's coming from the same people who treat splinters with worm blood and donkey dung. Yuck. I was so inspired by this talk and really wanted to commit these 4 tests to my memory. Though I'm not a professional, I ended up writing a little poem to help me to do so entitled The Bible, which I will now share with you. How can you believe what the Bible is saying, and how can you trust that it's true? I'm so glad you asked me. I'll give you 4 reasons. Sit down and I'll tell them to you. Cities and artifacts have been uncovered right where God said they would be. Historical accuracies found in the Bible confirmed by archaeology. Scientifically accurate, may be hard to believe, but God's word is just that. It is true. If the doctors believed the life found in the blood, George Washington would not have turned blue. The prophecies made in the scriptures are accurate, right 100% of the time. I have one last good reason to tell you about and be finished with my little rhyme. Never once does the Bible dispute itself, contradict, or negate, or deny. It's internally consistent from beginning to end. God is unable to lie. God holds his word higher than above his own name, sharper than a 2-edged sword. The Bible's alive. It's a trustworthy book given to us by the Lord. So now if someone asks you, why are you a Christian? You can say, because I believe the Bible. And then when they ask you, why do you believe the Bible is true? You can say, because it is prophetically, historically, and scientifically accurate, as well as internally consistent. And please go listen to the lecture. It's so good. I've linked it below. Thank you so much for watching, liking, and subscribing. I pray this video has given you some food for thought and has blessed you. Remember 1 Peter 3, 8, and 9. To sum up, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead. For you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing.